Hello everyone, my name's Mariah Harnish and I'm going to be talking to you about Bartlett and Stroop today. So let's go ahead and get started. First, we're going to talk about Bartlett. His full name was Sir Frederick Charles Bartlett, and he was born on the 20th of October, 1886, and he died the 30th of September, 1969. He was a British psychologist, and he was born in a place called Gloucestershire, that's a mouthful, England. He has a pretty strong academic background. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy at the University Correspondence College, where after that he went to London University and got his master's with an emphasis on ethics and sociology. So he was pretty well-rounded. He was also into anthropology, which is basically the study of other cultures, trying to understand their ways of life, and to a certain extent preserve them, although that's debatable. So then, in 1922, he became director of the Psychological Laboratory in Cambridge and was awarded the position of chair in experimental psychology in 1931. So that's a pretty big honor. He's keeping up the trend. He's important for several reasons when it comes to the field of psychology, and these are kind of bullet points of what stuck out to me when I was researching him. So he wrote a book called Remembering. I believe it was in 1932, and that was his first book. All of these other points, except the last one, Thinking, came out of remembering. So his theory of remembering basically states that we have a cultural context for our memory, and that there are certain things that trigger memories to form, and there are certain things that deny the formation of memory. He likes to place emphasis on how things are arranged in the context of your schema, which brings us to the second point. Schema to him essentially was, in a certain respect, it was all sorts of things that influence your psychology. Examples of something affecting your schema or my schema would be religion, politics, our culture, what we see on TV every day, how we were raised. It's basically how your culture affects your psychology. It is encapsulated in the schema theory. And he illustrated how schema affects our ability to remember things in his experiment that he talks about in Remembering, called The War of Ghosts. Basically, The War of Ghosts was a Canadian folk tale. I think it had some indigenous origin, right? So he told this story to some of his research participants, and he found that over the course of, let's say he told it to you and he said, okay, repeat it to me. People would get it right. They would get every single point right to begin with. If he said, hey, do you remember that story I told you last week? Can you tell it to me again? What he found was that they would substitute things that fit their schema, and they would substitute them in parts of the story. So if there was a canoe in the story, it would be a boat, because a boat was what those in Edwardian England, in the 1900s, had a context for. So after that, his other book was Thinking, and Thinking focused on, once again, the narrative aspect of he was really fascinated with stories and our ability to remember. And so Thinking, he gave people open-ended stories, and he told them to complete it realistically. And this was another documentation of his laboratory experiments at Cambridge. And once again, what he found and what he believed was that our schemas take over, and it's almost an unconscious completion of that story. If you told them to create it realistically, it inherently expressed a deep aspect of their psychological schema. So that's why he was pretty important. Now we're going to talk about John Ridley Stroop. He was born March 21st, 1897, and he died September 1st, 1973. He was an American psychologist, and he lived his entire life in Tennessee. He was born in a place called Murfreesboro. He graduated high school, went to a 2-year junior college in Nashville, graduated first in his class, and then he went to George Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee. He got a Bachelor's of Science in 1924, and then 1 year later, holy crap, he was just going for it. He achieved his Master's of Science in 1925 with an emphasis on experimental psychology and a minor in educational psychology. So he was kind of on the same track as Bartlett, but worlds away. He then went to work at the Jessup Psychological Laboratory, where he built on studies from the early 1800s that Cattell and Wundt had performed over in Germany in their laboratory. Now, he had kind of less information out there about him, but he is famous for one reason, and for this reason, he is probably more famous in a pop cultural sense than Bartlett. The Stroop effect was something that he originated, and it was basically an experiment that demonstrated that our brain can't do two things at once when they're very specific things. So he was demonstrating the concept of interference. How it works is a color word task is set up to demonstrate interference between reading an object's name and naming an object. And so we see right here, this is the Stroop effect. I'd venture to say that you've all seen it before, probably on Facebook. It seems like a pretty easy thing. I know every time I see it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to beat that, and then I just don't. So, yeah. And just a little fun fact about him, he was actually, I guess, really into Christianity. So that was his number one passion, and as he got older, he kind of drifted away from the field of psychology and began to do more religious studies. But he was always working in a university setting, he just wasn't always working with psychology. So, and there you have it. That is Bartlett and Stroop. My name is Mariah Harnish, and thank you so much for your time. Bye.